Good morning and welcome to our forum this morning. My name's Dennis Fitzgerald. I'm the Executive Director of Catholic Social Services Victoria. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you. Thank you for coming. I acknowledge Bernie Cronin, the Chair of our Council, with us today. Our guests Francis Sullivan and Patricia Faulkner, who will be introduced to you very soon. As we gather, we acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the land in which we gather, pay respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and pay respects to any Indigenous Australians with us today. And we meet in the spirit of the words of the prophet, the prophet Micah, who spoke to us about focusing on the essentials that have been explained to us. And we meet in that spirit, and a commitment to work in that heritage. Thanks for the opportunity to gather. It's my pleasure now to hand over to Jenny Greer, who's going to lead us through the morning. Jenny's the General Manager of Heritage and Information at MacKillop Family Services. She's the Deputy Chair of the Council at Catholic Social Services of Victoria, and she's the Chair of our working group on responding to abuse. So I'll hand over to Jenny. Thanks.
Thank you, Dennis, and good morning, everyone. And I too would like to acknowledge that we meet this morning on the land of the Wurundjeri people and pay my respects to their elders, past and present and future. We're very pleased this morning to be hosting this forum. It's an initiative of the subcommittee of the Council of Catholic Social Services Victoria. We're particularly delighted this morning that Francis Sullivan and Patricia Faulkner are able to give up their time to address us. It is vital at this point in time that we are very clear as organisations of the Catholic Church what our responsibilities going forward are to ensure the protection of children. I think we need to be reminded that early in 2013, the Royal Commission into Sexual Abuse of Children in Institutions in Australia commenced. That commission is due to present its findings in December of this year. They have had 7,113 private sessions, 57 public hearings, and examined 1.2 million documents. 59% of abuse reported to the Royal Commission has come from within religious institutions, 2/3 of which were Catholic institutions. We cannot shy away from this. This is our history, this is part of our story, and going forward, in the words of Justice McClellan, we must ensure that children are protected. The community will not accept the legitimacy of any institution which does not give priority to the safety and well-being of the children for which it has responsibility. So that's our challenge. I've been recently in some gatherings of Catholic people, Catholic leaders, and I have been rather surprised and shocked to hear them say, we can't wait till this Royal Commission is out of the way, then we can start on the real work of the Church promoting good news. My view is, once the Royal Commission ends, the real work starts to ensure that all children in our care in the future are protected. So I think on that note, we should now hand over to Francis. It's Francis' task this morning to bring us absolutely up to date with what has been happening with the Royal Commission, what has been happening with the Truth, Justice and Healing Council of the Church, and what it is that we need to do to go forward from now on. Now, every time when we introduce Francis, we do have to go through your little bio. So, for the past 4 years, Francis Sullivan has been the Chief Executive Officer of the Truth, Justice and Healing Council, established by the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference and Catholic Religious Australia, to oversee the Church's engagement with the Royal Commission. Before commencing with the Council, Francis was Secretary General of the Australian Medical Association. Prior to that, he was the CEO of Catholic Health Australia for 14 years and was the senior advisor to the Minister for Health in Western Australia. He has a master's degree in theology from Loyola University in Chicago and a bachelor's degree in politics from Curtin University. Early in 2008, the Australian Catholic University awarded him a doctorate for his work in public health advocacy. Francis lives in Canberra, almost as cold as Melbourne this morning, with his wife Susan, and they have 3 adult children. Francis is a good friend of Catholic Social Services Victoria, and we are delighted, Francis, to welcome you this morning, and we're hoping that you will talk for 20 minutes and then we'll have discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. And I like that, hoping that I'll talk for 20 minutes. People know that I can talk for longer than that. Thank you very much again for the invite and for the opportunity to give you a bit of an update. It's an odd update because we are literally in an interim period. You know, our greatest delight is the establishment of Catholic professional standards and the fact that the leadership of the Church took the advice that we needed to put in place a far more professional and independent outfit to look at not only the type of standards that we think should reflect best practice in the area of safeguarding, whether they're children, vulnerable people or adults generally, but also the real first there, and we need to emphasise this as a world first, is that leaders, whether they're bishops or religious leaders, whether they're the new PJP groupings, are going to be held to account themselves for the implementation of a culture of safeguarding. Nowhere in the world does that occur on an obligatory basis. Sure, you have parts in Canada, you have parts in the US and Ireland and so on where it's a voluntary arrangement and where the organisation itself is somewhat hamstrung about how it can deal with that. But this model has all the potential to lead the world in bringing bishops and others to a proper system of accountability. If you're a Vatican watcher, which means that you're not doing anything except looking at Google and Mick Kelly's website, but if you're a Vatican watcher, you know that even the Holy Father is struggling with how to make bishops accountable. So this model of CPS, I think, has the potential to really be quite prophetic. Now we need to be proud about that because when we started this journey 4 years ago, there was no way on earth that the church leadership would have gone there. So we can thank the pressure not only of ourselves, but of the whole environment around the Royal Commission. Jenny makes the point, and it's a good one. Whenever we are any group's in crisis, and we are, whenever a group is in crisis, people clutch any narrative that gives them comfort, that helps them sort of justify or contextualise. And the narrative that people are desperately trying to either deal with or get rid of is the narrative that, this Royal Commission was really good because it showed it just wasn't the Catholic Church. And I'm like, so what? The fact that it was the Catholic Church is our problem. The way we've got to own that. So the final report of the Royal Commission is due on the 15th of December. It will be many volumes long. And given the stats that you just heard from Jenny, there are bound to be some exclusive volumes on us. I have no idea whether we see the report straight away or not, because it's a report that goes to all governments through the Commonwealth Government. And if you just think about the 15th of December, hopefully someone's at home at the Commonwealth Government to actually receive it. As a matter of fact, we're not quite sure who the Commonwealth Government will be on the 15th of December. We probably are fairly safe there's a Governor-General. But that aside, our council, our brief is pretty well going to be done from then. So our job was to get everything to that point. We'll have an activity report probably released November or so. That's nothing much, that's like an annual report. That's just saying everything we've done. That's trying to just put on the record for all those historians that are going to try and do something with this at some point. But we will provide the leadership with a response to the final report if it's possible. And that will be, you know, something that we are going to press very hard that becomes public. And that will be a report about recommendations to the church specifically from what we've seen over the 5 years, but also elements that are in the final report. Because there's going to need to be an implementation process. Our council's already put to the leaders that they really should be thinking about some type of implementation process and body that demonstrates that the Catholic Church is dinkum about what comes out of the final report. And importantly, that's a body that's not just about bishops. It's a body about the church leadership. So religious orders, PJPs and bishops, constituting some sort of oversight coordinating body. Because frankly our problem is going to be that if we're not careful we'll just disintegrate. And you'll end up we'll do what we always do, and that is we'll look after our own patch and be hypercritical of every other patch because they're just not good enough. But it's essential that I think that we have in place some type of implementation body. The Royal Commission's recommendations will obviously sort of go to a number of areas, but remember their initial brief. Their initial brief is to look at the administrative best practice for institutions. So you've got to think like that. That the type of actions that will come from the Royal Commission report that state governments particularly will look at are what are the administrative reforms that they can bring in their circumstance, in line with the report. My personal take on this, and I could be absolutely wrong, but my personal take is that national efforts will be a very slow train coming. Because I think in the round tables that have occurred, both publicly and privately in the Royal Commission, that involve state governments, it takes very little for the state governments to demonstrate that they get the problems and they are trying to do it within their circumstances. And I can't see that mindset changing. So whether it's, as you know, there's, what do they call it, reportable conduct changes that are occurring across the country. It was announced in Canberra about a week ago, and they're sort of dribbling out here at some point too. And so in other words, they're not going to be identical, but they're going to be thematic. So I think you work on that sort of pragmatic approach. Secondly, the type of recommendation in the broad that you can expect the Catholic Church to receive will be something like this. And we've made this rod for our own back. The general mantra that came out of Melbourne and out of the country was that we were a bit of a mess until 1996. And then through some sort of divine revelation, we woke up. And in waking up, we established things. The Towards Healing program and the Melbourne response. And I always say, and you've heard me say it, when I started this job, most people didn't know what Towards Healing was, and most people thought the Melbourne response was sack the coach. So the point more is that we said we got it sorted from 96 onwards. Therefore, it's highly likely that the Royal Commission will say that the church leadership prior to 1996 was negligent in the welfare of children. That's a profound finding with big implications. The second thing is already starting, and it started yesterday, was that part of the search processes of the Royal Commission actually captured hundreds of thousands of documents from Catholic Church insurances. And the documents went in unscrutinised because there was no time to go through and look through the documents. The documents have revealed, in many cases, a problem of what they call prior knowledge. That various dioceses or religious orders knew of perpetrators and they perpetrated again. And thus the insurance company didn't cover for that insurance because prior knowledge is a discounting factor. Now, besides the moral issue there, it shows you that there are going to be future legal actions against the church authorities that will be very expensive. Now, it's important for us to understand that that has an impact on resourcing. Thirdly, the redress scheme that the Commonwealth is seeking to introduce supposedly will be introduced for operation in July 2018. It will be a Commonwealth redress scheme, obviously drafted for Commonwealth services where individuals have been abused. There will also be separate legislation which will enable every state to harmonise into that scheme. It is still the case, though, that if there is a Catholic authority wanting to be part of a Commonwealth redress scheme, they cannot be part of it unless the state government where they operate is either part of it or somehow has passed over authority for them to be in it. Don't ask me why. It's constitutional. Don't ask me, is there another way of looking at it? Maybe. But at the moment, that's the circumstance. So by July 2018, is it possible that the Catholic Church generally will be in a national redress scheme? I don't know. Is the attitude of the current leadership that they should be? Yes. Can we solve the problem? No. So it's going to be an issue at the government jurisdictional levels to sort that one through. If that doesn't happen, my hunch is that state governments will have to try and provide something. So that's the next administrative thing to deal with, that there will be redress. And whether the redress is run through a Commonwealth scheme or whether it's run through state-based schemes, you'll have to assume that it'll have to be fairly similar to the one that's being proposed, which is a cap of about 150, with about three major components in determining the redress. Firstly is the gravity of the action, the second is the impact, and the third is the vulnerability of the circumstances. And that last bit is really an important point, because some people, of course, were abused in circumstances literally because of the vulnerable nature of the circumstance they were in, let alone the fact that they were also just prey for predators. They're pragmatic issues. I think deeper issues go something like this. When we started this program, you've heard me say it before, I'm sure, we took market research around the whole area. And we got Newspol to do proper researching for us around the Royal Commission, public attitudes, and so on. And if you recall, when Julia Gillard announced the Royal Commission, for 3 weeks in succession, in any published polling, there was a 90% approval rating for the decision she made. There's never been a decision made by an Australian leader in published polling that it's been so popular for so long. And that was reflected also when we got Newspol to poll for us. And remember that we were polling practicing Catholics, people who identify as Catholic, and then the great unwashed. And even though Michael O'Shaughnessy, who ran Newspol at the time, said to me, "Francis, this is the worst set of numbers I've ever seen," before we had to present it to the bishops. I said, "Don't worry about it, there's a really good news story in here." And when I went to the bishops, I said, "It's great, these results are fantastic." They go, "Why?" I said, "We found practicing Catholics." So the first question, the hardest question really about that was, when the church leadership speaks about child sex abuse, how trustworthy are they? It didn't matter which demographic you were looking at, 7 out of 10 said untrustworthy. Now 7 out of 10 people saying you're untrustworthy, that means you've got over 70% of people not listening to you. And if you've got 70% of people not listening to you, your impact on trying to change the minds of things like governments and school funding falls away, doesn't it? And haven't we seen that? The next thing is, when we ask them about local things like their local services, welfare services, schools and so on, about support, it was the opposite. 8 out of 10 support. Now from just a basic perspective, when you say Catholic welfare, thumbs up. When you say Catholic church, thumbs down. So when we talk about the future from now on, there are some fundamental strategic questions that need to be addressed. Firstly, for most people now, the value and the warmth for the church is in what it does. The importance for the church is that the faces need to change. We can't roll out the old faces and expect a new message. When you do strategic planning, everyone says it's just perceptions, but in strategic planning, perceptions are reality, right? Now, it's terribly important here that we do transition through the period of the Royal Commission, but we need new faces doing new talking, representing what we're about as a church. In other words, articulating a contemporary heart of the church. Really important. Not the same old, same old. So what Jenny was talking about, where some people are saying, let's just get back to what it was all about. Well, no, you don't go back. Never go back. Secondly, about that is, even though this has been such a devastating and horrible period of revelation, and there's no doubt that it's demoralised many people and disenchanted more, the heart of the problem for us is relevancy. The heart of the problem for the church in the modern world is relevancy. The fact that there's been hypocrisy and crimes only makes that worse. So we need to again start asking ourselves, what is it about what we do, how we articulate it, that can build a bridge into the community? Not be trying to be separate. Ingrained in the culture of the church is always a sense that we are different. We are separate. We are apart from. Now that culture was supposed to be addressed at Vatican II. That idea about it being a perfect society and all that, that's old hat. Yet in the Royal Commission it was quite clear that our culture was one of secrecy, separateness, being special, even needing to be treated in a special way, almost affronted by the fact that the law was getting too intrusive. So the cultural questions that come out of the Royal Commission, our council will address in its final report, but groups like your own need to start looking at what is it about our culture that is healthy, what is it about our culture that's engaging, what is it about our culture that's relevant, what is it about our culture that sends the signal that we think the overall human project is about human flourishing, not about judgment. Thanks.
Thank you, Francis. Now what we're going to try and do now is a little experiment to see if this is going to work. We want every table to reflect on what Francis has said for about 5 minutes in discussion with each other, and then every table to come up with one question or one comment that Francis will be invited to respond to. Peter will be going around with a roving mic, so reflect, have your discussion and get your question ready. You've got about 5 to 7 minutes to do that, and then comments and questions to Francis. Okay?